A slightly disappointing survival horror adventure with a heavy emphasis on stealth. Phantaruk. Riding on the back of successes such as Amnesia and Outlast, this is once again a horror game which uses lighting and an inability to fight back to instill fear into the player. However, since there are little to no puzzles as such in this, it can at times feel more like a walking simulator. The story is pretty generic. The human race as a whole is in danger as billions have been killed by a huge outbreak of smallpox, and you're on board Purity 02, a spaceship owned by the H+ Corporation, which is a science research vessel. The H+ Corporation has been trying to develop a way around this horrific disease, but their activity isn't quite as noble as it seems. You start off with the traditional sci-fi spaceship scenario, picking yourself up off the floor with every alarm on the ship warning you that bad things have happened and are more than likely going to continue to happen. The usual Disney sign that everything's going to be just fine. Naturally, the first level predominantly serves as a tutorial, although there isn't a huge amount to teach you other than movement and instructions on what the device strapped to your arm is actually trying to tell you. The levels are littered with the usual array of text and audio logs which explain the situation and why no one is around to tell you in person. But there is also a lot of little post-it notes around which are also just for random appointments or jokes left over from happier times. In order to progress through the levels, you also need to find ID cards and power sources to reactivate systems which have entire sections locked down, or unlock various restricted departments. Fairly standard tactics for this style of game. The problem is that there is little to no challenge in actually finding these pieces, and often they end up serving as little more than a tool to make you backtrack through an area you've already been through looking for hidden objects. It would have been far more entertaining if there was a puzzle element to unlock the areas, or if there was clues guiding you to the items. I found it incredibly frustrating rummaging through corridors and various labs to try and find the one particular item I'm looking for, and it doesn't help that the other game mechanics just slow this process down even further with relatively mundane tasks. One of these mechanics is the creatures which are roaming around the ship, and judging by the piles of people pate, these chaps aren't the friendliest. These must be avoided by lurking in the shadows and waiting for them to pass, and conveniently almost every corridor on the ship seems to have bypasses in order to allow you past them. Another familiar feature from Amnesia is that when you're looking at the creatures you get blurred vision to indicate that your heart rate is increasing, and also some spooky music to ensure you know just how scared to be. Because of this, you spend a lot of your time hidden on the floor or in cupboards for the perfect moment to scuttle past, but you're also having to deal with the infection spreading through your body over time, which must be treated with your limited supply of antidotes which can be found around the ship. This all doesn't sound too bad, but the game relies entirely on these few mechanics alone, and there isn't even that much creature variety to spice it up either. You have a stunning selection of 2, both of which have almost identical mechanics anyway. The graphic design of the levels is pretty good, as colourful and interesting as you'd expect a spaceship to be anyway. It's nothing particularly revolutionary, but it's more than adequate for a small-scale indie title. It's helped quite drastically by the different lighting effects which you encounter along the way, and the various particle effects which are dotted throughout the levels, which range from dust clouds to firestorms. It adds the necessary flair onto what would have otherwise been a fairly bland environment. I just wish it wasn't constantly trying to hide the graphics with visual effects which blur or obscure your vision due to the virus coursing through your body. If you don't take the antidote in time, the screen becomes so obscured you can't really navigate at all anymore, and you're probably better off just restarting. Now, this kind of game doesn't really start on the best foot with me. I didn't particularly like Amnesia due to not being scared by the monsters I'm not allowed to look at and wanting to confront enemies rather than run and hide. Phantaruk does nothing to change this, and in many ways it feels like the same game but with a lot of mechanics missing. I spent a lot of my game time just wandering back and forth through the same areas repeatedly, looking for one item, with no clue on what I was really actually looking for, and it was frustrating rather than being challenging. It took me 4 hours to complete the game in total, but I think if you stumbled upon the items you need to progress, you're probably looking at more like 2.5 hours of game time. There are a lot of different collectibles to find, but I can't say I'm intrigued enough to go back and find them myself. Unfortunately, I can't recommend this game, but it does show a lot of promise for the dev team behind it. It has a decent amount of polish on what is there, and with more time spent on the mechanics and the interactivity, I think this could have been a great game. It is significantly better when you're making progress, but there wasn't enough there to keep me interested.